Good morning. I now call to order the November 3rd, 2021 Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Land Use Hearing. I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty for justice and all. Good morning, everyone. We are holding this meeting in person and virtually. The Zoom link and the materials for this meeting are located at clackamas.us/meetings/bcc/land use. Today's hearing is continued from October 6, 2021, and is to consider ZDO-277, a proposed legislative text amendment to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance that is intended to provide zoning opportunities to address housing shortage issues in unincorporated Clackamas County. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, all elected officials, and members of the public, that Robert's Rules of Order will be observed during these proceedings. General public comment was taken at the October 6 hearing. The record was left open for the board to receive further written comment. We have received 2 comments, and they were distributed to the board yesterday and today. Have we received anything more within the last 24 hours?
No, Chair. You received an email from me yesterday, and then I think you all were included on an email that was received this morning from Roseanne Johnson with the Homebuilders Association and Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors. Mm-hmm. I have included a printed copy of that in front of you in case you have not had a chance to read it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you wanted me to summarize it, or are we all good?
Nope.
Okay.
I will now close the record and allow the board to discuss and deliberate on this matter. Today's hearing on ZDO-277 will proceed as follows. First, we will hear a presentation from Principal Planner Martha Fritzie. Second, the board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting us in the hearing today is our clerk, Mary Bork, our planner, Martha Fritzie, at the center, and Assistant County Counsel, Nate Boderman, to my left. At the October 6 hearing, the board voted to approve changes recommended by the Planning Commission and staff related to amendments that would increase the density bonus for affordable housing. At today's hearing, staff has prepared a number of motions, I believe there's 6 or 7, that will guide us through the remainder of the issues that staff has summarized in the staff report. After the introductory portion of the staff presentation, staff will discuss each of these 6 remaining issues one at a time, and the board will deliberate and decide on each one before moving on to the next issue. Once we have voted on the issues individually, the board will then take a final vote to approve or deny the entire ZDO-277 proposal. Likewise, all my commissioners have had ample opportunity to meet with staff, voice your concerns, have any additions or subtractions, and you all have the printed material that was supplied to you yesterday and an email that was also supplied to you yesterday. With that in mind, we will continue with the staff presentation and a PowerPoint. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I am going to share this on Zoom. So it's not going to come on the screen, correct? It'll just be
on that
on the
and it's
TVs.
on the dais in front of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Come on. There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. As was mentioned, we are here for a continued hearing to consider code amendments related to Planning File ZDO-277. Technically, this is a legislative text amendment to the Zoning and Development Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan. The sections listed up here. And the purpose of all of these amendments is to provide opportunities to help alleviate the housing shortage for people at various income levels in unincorporated Clackamas County. If you recall, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the background of the Land Use Housing Strategies Project generally. This is one small piece of a much bigger housing project that we are working on here at the county. This represents Phase 1. There were 3 specific items included in Phase 1, increasing the affordable housing density bonus. That was approved in the first part of this hearing in early October. And what we are here to talk about today are these other 2 items: increasing allowed housing density in commercial zones and multifamily parking requirements. It's important to keep in mind as we talk about each of these items, we are going to talk about them in pieces, and I make motions and vote on them in pieces. All of these pieces do go together, but they were split out for a reason, and the reason is that they're all interrelated, but they do not all need to be approved together. So in other words, you can approve some of the parking reductions that are proposed, but not all of them. And you could approve part of the commercial zone proposed changes, but not all of them.
Okay, so let's have a point of clarification on what you just said. County Council. If we were to split up this vote on our final vote, we would have to change the ZDO number, correct?
Procedurally, I'm not sure if we change the ZDO numbers or identify it separately. What I think, more to your point, we would just run 2 different ordinances, potentially.
Okay, so how is the ordinance identified?
We would handle that on our end. I'm not sure if it would be.
Okay, I just want to give you a cue up. I don't know
Yeah,
how the
no,
board's going to
that-
vote. I have not
that's
talked to
fine.
any commissioner how they're going to vote. However, this is complicated, and that's why we have decided to break out into these motions. Commissioner Savas, you're in the queue.
Yeah, mine's procedural as well, I think, and that is, I understand how it's laid out, and I understand the rationale. It seems logical to do it. And it seems, if I'm hearing it correctly, let's just say that, out of the multiple votes that we have on portions of this, when the last vote is made, we'll know what the package looks like, and then we vote up or down on the package. But if the package doesn't pass, then nothing passes, correct?
That's how it's currently set up, but I think to the chair's point, if there is a path forward for at least part of the package, it may be
Right.
that we could split out certain elements.
Okay, and I think that, well, maybe this isn't the right time, but I understand the procedure. I guess I'll hold my other comments about other things that are not in the package, but are affected by what we're doing, that we're not talking about here today, which is reasonable. But I'm not suggesting it should be, but I'll wait for that later, a little bit later.
Well, it's hard to, I'm going to say, I have with staff requested that these motions be broken out for this very purpose. Without talking to my commissioners and daisy chaining what your intention is or what your issues are, we can only go so far. So if there's any objections to anything coming up, we would be taking individual votes. A 3-2 majority will pass these individually. We will combine them at the end if that's what the commissioners want to do. If not, we're going to have to separate out some stuff. Nate's going to have to come up with a new ordinance number, and we're going to have to, it could be very messy, is what I'm saying. And Paul, you bring up some issues that aren't in this, that we probably all have concerns about, but I would say we minimize our thoughts about issues that aren't in this, and then forward those to another date to be dealt with in another policy session. That would be my suggestion. But with that in mind, Martha, would you please continue?
Yes. So each of these 2 main components that we're talking about in the Housing Strategies Project in Phase 1 has been separated into subcomponents, and each of these 1A, B, and 2A, B, C, D line up with the motions that we're expecting to be made today. And so I'm going to talk about each one of these subcomponents separately and then ask for questions, and then I believe there will be discussion and deliberation after. So I'm just going to jump right in.
Go ahead.
Well, we all know, I guess the staff recommendation, it would be to approve all of these as was recommended by the Planning Commission as well. I had to throw that up front. Now I'm going to jump into the first issue, and The very first topic is increasing maximum housing density allowed in certain commercial zones. And if you recall, I've showed you maps for the last several meetings. We're talking about 4 commercial zones that currently do allow multifamily housing. It's limited to 25 dwelling units an acre. Those zones are generally found along our major corridors, along McLaughlin, 82nd Avenue and Drive, and some other areas in the urban unincorporated area. The proposal is to increase the allowed amount of housing in those commercial zones to 60 dwelling units an acre. This is a recommendation that came out of the housing task force that was put together several years back, and also is intended to begin to address the housing shortage in the urban area that was found in the housing needs analysis, as well as your own performance Clackamas goals. And that's all I'll say about that. Is there any questions?
Commissioners, any questions for the presenter on this particular amendment?
Could you just state those zones, C3, and just list them and
Yes.
what they mean?
C3, which is general commercial, retail, RTL, office commercial, OC, and community commercial, CC.
Okay, thank you.
Let us now consider the recommendation to adopt an overall increase in allowed housing density from 25 to 60 dwelling units per acre in the C3, RTL, OC, and CC commercial zones. I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the portion of ZDO-277 to adopt an overall increase in allowed housing density from 25 to 60 dwelling units per acre in the C3, RTL, OC, and CC commercial zones as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Seconded.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Fisher, and I'm not going to repeat it all, and seconded by Commissioner Scholl. Any further comments?
Yes,
Yes, go ahead.
for discussion. So this is where I'm going to broach it right here.
Sure.
And we made this vote last time, right? On October 6th, we voted on this very one, didn't we? I thought we did vote on one element of it.
We voted on just once.
Increasing the affordable housing density bonus.
the bonus.
That's what was voted on.
Okay.
This was set over till today.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
So we are doing things, essentially, some things piece by piece in the overall scheme of land use planning to address the housing and a number of other things. The board has a series of priorities, some of which this helps and some of which this does not help. So it's, I won't say contradictory, but it's in somewhat a conflict. And as I say that some of these things are being addressed, not all of the things that are impacted are being adequately addressed. And I'm just going to list a few of those as reminders. Number one, these corridors are typically oriented towards employment lands, if you will. Certainly, this is not industrial, it's commercial on the commercial side, but these are employment centers. And typically, a lot of these are often good paying jobs. And if you want to look at the pictures before us, you know, what 25 units an acre looks like on housing or 60, so forth, there's not a lot of employment opportunity per acre. And usually, often, sometimes the pay is less. So that's a concern. But we don't have a path or discussion queued up anywhere on dealing really with employment lands other than the Sunrise Corridor, for example, as a means of employment land. Is that commercial? No, it's industrial. Maybe some cities are doing it here and there, a splash here and a splash there, but that's not adequately being addressed. So my concern is about displacing jobs and businesses that are currently in place, that are producing tax revenue for the county, that are generating employment taxes for the state and the feds, and so forth, that could be possibly compromised if a whole swath of businesses are taken out and replaced with housing, and the jobs are minimal compared to that. So that's issue number one. There is no path. I don't see one on addressing or balancing that displacement. So for the jobs lost, what is the means in which we recover those or plan for those? The other issue is infrastructure. There's not a lot of plans for growing the infrastructure nearby. So if taking these pictures and looking at knowing some of the nature of some of the lands, we're adding more pervious or impervious surfaces. So that means more draining and flooding type issues could be grown, but there's no real flooding drainage plans in place to a deal that actually specifically are designed to deal with the growth. We're seeing it here and there on a site by site, but collectively, the overall capacity of some of these areas is not being addressed in a meaningful way whatsoever. The other issue, transit, out of our control to some degree because that's a transit district, but it's inadequate. In our transit study recently and comparatively in the region where a lot of these units go have substantially more transit than we do here in Clackamas County. So that is another factor in which gives me some concern and reluctance about that. So if we're going to be displacing jobs, this is how the two link together. We're going to be displacing jobs, and people are going to have to drive farther out or commute farther out, and there's not much transit. We're not giving people any choices other than to have cars, which gets back to our parking issue to some degree. So overall, those are some big pictures. I'm not going to cover all of them, but displacement is a big factor when it comes to the businesses and good high-paying jobs. Granted, some of these can be have units on the lower floor that are business-oriented, but I do know those market prices are sometimes cost prohibitive for businesses to pay those kind of leases and rents, and that's probably why we have a lot of them in Clackamas County that are sitting there vacant today. So those are concerns, and I just want to put that out there. I don't expect any answers. There's no questions associated with that, but that's why I want to look at the entire package towards the end and see what we have at the end. And here we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from commissioners on this? Mary, please take the poll.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Shull,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Let us now consider the recommendation to adopt, no, staff, you're up. I got ahead of myself. You're up next, Martha.
Yes. So the second piece of the density conversation in those 4 commercial zones is the potential inclusion of a density bonus for housing that's developed in a mixed-use development. And so the intent of adding this was to provide something of an incentive for developers to either leave commercial on the property and add housing, which could happen, or to build a mixed-use building like the stacked one that's up in this upper corner here, in order to provide both commercial and housing on a given property. A couple of things to keep in mind when we had this conversation at the last hearing, there was a lot of conversation about parking, and I just want to be very clear that the county's zoning ordinance requires parking in this sort of scenario, both for the housing and for the commercial that's developed on the property. Our zoning code has pretty robust commercial parking requirements, range anything from about 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet for retail up to 15 spaces per 1,000 square feet for a sit-down restaurant. And so if mixed use were developed on the property, with or without the density bonus, there would be a calculation of how much parking was required for the residential portion, plus how much parking is required for the commercial portion. And I just wanted that to be very clear. So the 20% housing density bonus would be on top of what was just voted on. And like I said, it's intended to provide a little bit of incentive for developers to actually develop the mixed use, which as planners we would like to see in these areas because it provides a little more synergy and walkability in the community.
Thank
Questions?
you. What is the likelihood of developers using the density bonus?
The likelihood? I have no idea. I can tell you that Some of this conversation on increasing the density generally in the commercial zones was based on conversations with developers and developers that approached the planning division and indicated that they could not make their proposed developments pencil without more units. So,
That's aside from the 20% density bonus, though.
yes, and so a lot of developers had actually asked for more than the 60 dwelling units an acre that, that we were proposing. And so I guess I would like to think that this would be used.
And so what's the incentive on the 20% density bonus?
Well, it allows for a developer to put more dwelling units on the property, which would theoretically help their financial pro forma because they would be able to get more income from those units.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so, Martha, I think earlier you spoke to, and I want to make sure we're not conflating the two. I think you spoke to that parking up to, we use the words up to. Was up to a requirement or is up to optional?
When I was talking about the commercial,
Yeah, when you were talking about I think you're talking about the parking, in reference to the parking. If you meant commercial parking, then great, but I'm more interested in what the minimums are than I am what the up-tos are.
that was the minimum. I think maybe I didn't phrase it quite in the best way. I was talking about the range of parking, minimum parking requirements that we currently have for commercial uses. It depends on the type of use. It ranges, at a minimum, ranges from like 4 to 15 spaces per 1,000 square feet of leasable area, depending on what type of business it is. That's where the up to came from, but those are minimums.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Fisher? Did you have your hand up?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Let's
if
now
there are no-
consider the recommendation to adopt an overall increase in allowing housing density from 25 to 60. Nope. I'll get it right. Let's consider the recommendation to adopt a 20% density bonus for housing developed as part of the mixed-use development within the C3, RTL, OC, and CC commercial zones. I will now entertain a motion.
I move we approve the portion of ZDO-277 to adopt an additional 20% density bonus for housing developed as part of a mixed-use development within the C3, RTL, OC, and CC commercial zones as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Second.
Commissioner Fisher has made the motion, Commissioner Schrader has seconded. Any further discussion on this particular motion? Seeing none, Mary, please call the poll.
Commissioner Shull,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Staff, what's up next?
Okay, now we get to the parking conversation. And if you recall, sort of the overall strategy is called right-sizing multifamily parking requirements. The the proposal relating to multifamily parking requirements really contains 4 parts now. And we're going to talk about each of them separately to hopefully piece this out and be able to make, so it can be more understandable, one, and also to be able to have discussion and make decisions on each piece of it. And so the very first piece is the overall parking requirement for all multifamily dwellings. This would be in any particular location in unincorporated Clackamas County. It would be a proposal for multifamily housing serving any population, any types of units. So currently, our zoning code requires either a minimum of 1.25 up to 1.75 parking spaces per unit, depending on how many bedrooms the unit has. And the proposal would be to reduce that for all multifamily housing by 0.25 spaces per dwelling unit across the board, which would result in what you see on the right here, which is 1 to 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit. This reduction is, and all of the reductions that staff is proposing and we've been discussing for the last several months, is based on data and research that we have found related to actual parking usage in parking lots. And specifically, as we get further in this, to various, populations or housing in certain locations. But it's also goes hand in hand with an increase in density, because when a developer comes in to build on their site, if they cannot fit all the parking on the property, they're not going to be able to provide the maximum number of units that's allowed in the zone. And it's a financial decision also, because when you come in to develop the housing, you're looking at costs and you're looking at revenues. Parking costs more, and if you cannot also provide the additional units, then the revenues go down and the financial feasibility of a development becomes less. And so this is the proposal put forth. It's important to keep in mind that there is a parking requirement that still is at least one, if not more, spaces per dwelling unit, even under this scenario.
Okay, thank you for that. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Okay, I'm going to take the last thing you said, Martha, first. When you say that there's more than one parking space per unit. So give me an example where it's two or more.
Well, there's at least one or more. So it doesn't go up to two or more. It ranges from 1 to 1.5. So if, for example, somebody came in with 100 one-bedroom units, they would have to provide 100 parking spaces. But if they came in with 100 three-bedroom units, they'd have to provide 150 parking spaces.
Right, yeah, so when you say more, it's a fractional more, it's not a full.
Fractional more, yes.
It's not a complete more, okay? Okay, a complete unit more. So, of these corridors that we're making these changes, are there any ones that you would say you have confidence in that there's adequate east-west, north-south transit service?
So I'm honestly not an expert in transit service. This multifamily parking would actually apply to any multifamily being developed anywhere in the unincorporated county, not just along the corridors. So I'm not sure how to answer that, I'm sorry.
So do I understand you correctly that this change in and of itself will apply more beyond the corridors?
Yes,
Okay, so this is actually this is more of a regional in Clackamas County. This is in the urban area across the board that we're making a parking change, not just these corridors.
yes.
Okay. All right, so my comment about this is that my experience in looking at a number of these places is that often when you have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom unit, there's usually 2 working people and 2 working people that drive, or sometimes 3 people that drive. And so while I can see that maybe if there's a place that has, only 1 car, there's a little bit of a quarter of a space, and then collectively, maybe when you're talking several hundred units, that might make up for it. But predominantly because of that, I am very concerned that of changing that. As a matter of fact, I would almost argue that in some instances that maybe 1.75 for a 3-bedroom or 1.5 for a 3-bedroom is inadequate, today. So I'm inclined to turn that down. Also, on the studies that you cited earlier on your presentation on this, are those, when they do those studies, do they break those studies out into highly metropolitan areas, or are they looking at rural, urban, more suburban? I mean, what are the types of demographics in which those studies indicate those results that you cited?
All of the above. And so there are some studies specific to proximity to light rail stations, which obviously tend to be more in urban areas. There's some data out there, both urban and rural, about actual car ownership by household size. And there are other parking studies that we looked at in other metropolitan areas, and some of them are split out into more suburban versus urban locations.
Okay. Yeah, my closing comment, colleagues, is that having, whether it's town halls or community discussions, we already have parking shortages today in these areas, and so I'm inclined not to support the reduction.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Any other comments on this moving forward? Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, I believe that this 1/4 of a parking space reduction is needed in order to stimulate developers to be attracted to building these kind of projects that we need with this new kind of density. If we have a situation where we have a higher density project being built, we also have the ability to effect mass transit in that area using bus service. So I support the idea of this. Again, in a 100-unit development, if everybody was in a one-bedroom apartment, you still have 100 parking spaces. So we need a compromise on this, and I believe that this reduction is in the best interest of the future of our housing situation in Clackamas County.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. Commissioner Fisher, you're up.
Yeah, I think that Commissioner Stoll said everything that I was thinking. The only other question I have is, I know Commissioner Savas and I sat in the back row of our homelessness and housing task force when they gathered to strategize these, all of the strategies that were put into to the recommendations. And I'm just interested, beyond that, the input that has played into this really comes from industry, as I understand it, through home builders, realtors, people that really have their finger on the pulse of what will it take to incentivize the type of increase of housing that we really need in the region. And I just wanted to know if there was anything else that you might know about the input that was received to come up with this recommendation.
Well, you're correct. All of those agencies and the task force were certainly provided input. I don't know that, none of those, the task force and a lot of the industry representatives didn't really get down to the nitty-gritty of the 0.25 reduction. I think there was generally a message that we received that there needs to be a reduction, and particularly in certain cases, which we'll talk about in B and C. But it's hard, certainly at a task force level, to get to a specific number. So that's what we're trying to do here. I think out there, there are lots of advocates for no parking, but we don't want to go that far. We realize that there are definitely negative impacts to that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah,
Will you finish, Commissioner?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Commissioner
I'll
Savas.
just be ready to make a motion when you're ready, Chair.
yeah, I just want to build a little bit on Commissioner Scholl's comments about transit. I would just maybe share with Commissioner Scholl and my colleagues, some of my colleagues already know this, but we've been asking for more transit in this county and on some of these corridors for over 20 years that I know that I've been involved in sitting on committees, and here we are 22, 23 years later, and nothing significant has been added in some of these corridors. Mm-hmm. So if the presumption is that transit will come, there has been no mention of it. As a matter of fact, on Monday evening, TriMet representative said there are no funds to do that, so I would not expect it.
Okay.
So with that, I'll conclude my comments.
Thank you.
Time.
Let us now consider the third recommendation to reduce the overall amount of parking required for any multifamily development by 0.25 spaces per unit. Sonia.
I move we approve the portion of ZDO-277 to reduce the overall amount of parking required for any multifamily development by 0.25 spaces per unit as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Second.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Fisher and seconded by Commissioner Schrader. Any further discussion?
I think this is a quality of life issue, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Mary, please call the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Nope.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Shull,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Staff, you're up.
Next, we are talking about an additional reduction to the required amount of parking, specifically for units that are held affordable for households at various income levels. The proposal is two-tiered. It has one ratio, which includes a 20% reduction for units, for developments that have units. Well, it's actually for the units that are affordable for households earning at or below 60% of the area's median income, and a 40% reduction, which results in the numbers in the right-hand column, for units that are affordable to households at or below 30% of the area's median family income. These units would have to be held affordable for at least 30 years.
It appears that the parking reduction is greater in the three-bedroom than it is in the one-bedroom. Is that right?
Well, it's based on a 20% reduction. And so it would be 20% of the 1.5, which is technically a little bit higher number than 20% of the 1.
Are there any further questions on this particular, this metric is a little bit confusing. Commissioner Shull, you're up.
Yes. Although I supported the 1/4 space reduction, I note that in talking to residents throughout the county, that there's very little support in the neighborhoods for this particular portion of our discussion today. I'd be very careful about further reduction. Also, I've noted that just because someone is in a affordable housing situation, there's very little evidence to support the idea that they have fewer cars. In fact, I think one of our studies suggested that there wasn't much reduction in the number of cars for people who are in a affordable housing situation. Our project up on Odie Road would indicate that that would be true. So I caution my constituents to look at this one very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, my experience has been, to my surprise, actually, how many folks that are in these either 60 or 30% MFI, how many of them actually have cars, the number of cars, actually. So that was a shocker to me. I think I learned that 2 years ago in a significant way. This morning, on my way over here, I drove by some of those facilities. Of course, it was 8:45 this morning, 8:30. Maybe a lot of people went to work, but there's still some of these areas where it's heightened. There's still parking deficiencies today. So I can't support this either.
I have some heartburn over this as well. Any other comments from commissioners before we go forward? Let's now consider the Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the rationale for this recommendation beyond what the Housing and Homelessness Task Force.
Well, the rationale is that certainly some of the data that we found did demonstrate that the actual demand for parking was lower among households at or below 60%, and particularly at or below 30%. In Clackamas County, there have been a couple of affordable housing projects approved at around the 60% median income level, and they have been approved with reduced parking, which was essentially in the range that's on the left-hand column there. And to our knowledge, we have not, we're not aware of any problems that have occurred in those parking lots. I went and looked at some of those as well earlier on in the project. And then in terms of the lowest income, I think that, we'd heard some testimony at the last hearing about somebody who would, like to live, who's on a fixed income and would like to live without a car and can't, and would like to live in a place that was a little more centralized and affordable to them. And if they could live without a car, they would. And of course, that would be less demand for parking. I can tell you, I have gone and looked at some of the lower income projects that serve at or below 30%, one of them down here in Oregon City, and I went and counted cars, and the parking lot was never full. And the actual parking ratio that I observed was maybe a 0.5 to 0.6, based on the number of units. And so I don't know that these are like the magic numbers, the right numbers. It is certainly feasible that we could put a different number in here. You could make a motion with an amendment and do something different, if you don't think these are the right numbers.
Thank you, Martha. We have some people in the queue here. Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, so I'm just stating that the underlying assumption here is that for people at that level of income, this is going to incentivize housing development with developers for housing that they can afford. And part of the incentive to the developer is actually decreasing parking spaces in order to make that pencil out, correct? Am I understanding that?
Yes, that is part of it.
Okay. What's the other part of it, Martha?
Well, the other part of it is that there is a lower demand for parking.
Okay,
And
great.
so this is about, like I said, right-sizing parking.
Right sizing,
But yes,
so
it
it-
certainly affects the bottom line of a developer and hopefully would incentivize and make more financially feasible the development of affordable housing.
But the information would suggest that the parking need isn't there at those income levels.
Well, there is some parking need. I mean, there
Yes,
certainly
right.
is some car ownership, but
Okay,
it's a lower parking need.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I have another comment to Commissioner Savas. You were in the queue.
Yeah, so facilities that I've seen, such as senior care, retirement centers, memory care, those types of things, I've noted that there's not really a parking issue in these types of places, because a lot of those people don't, at that point in time in their life where they don't necessarily have cars or need to go to work. And I'm really talking about the working class versus the people that are not in that category. So my question is, are those treated differently when it comes to parking requirements?
No, they're not under our current parking standards. They're treated differently only if it's serving a lower income, only if it's affordable senior.
Okay, so if it's, let's say a retirement center that's more for people of pretty decent incomes or resources, it's not low income, they would have the same parking requirement, whether it's that or
Yes.
a typical, workforce housing project where it's 80% MFI.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a way to address that where senior care or those can be treated separately or differently with clear and objective standards? Or as clear and objective standards?
Well, yes, I mean, we could assign a different parking ratio for developments that are serving that particular income. That was not part of the proposal. But,
Okay.
I mean, there's a way to do it, yes.
Yeah, I'll just say something I said earlier, and I'll just restate it a little bit differently. When I said earlier about, or asking the question about the parking changes we're making here are not around these corridors, what I'm going to say is that we are making, I didn't realize this in the first hearing, that we're making these parking changes across the urban port of the county in entirety for these types of developments. So I think that's what's more significant. So I guess in the sense that my thinking that it was isolated these corridors was a false one, or mistaken one, that is. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, you talk about this is affordable at 60%, below 60%. And so therefore, the incentive for the builder is to have less parking, but doesn't the builder receive credits and other incentives because they are building housing for this particular target population?
Are you talking about like low-income housing tax credits?
Yep.
So that is, and I am not a housing developer. I have limited knowledge about how actually affordable housing is financed, but that is one of the financing mechanisms that affordable housing developers can use.
Well, I'll say it for you. I will say it for you. We talk about affordability to the developer, where any one of my commissioners, I think, can talk to the fact they know that if you're going to build affordable multi-family units, usually a builder will apply for every single incentive they can along the line. Some say the argument on the downside is, well, it ends up costing more and more along the way. But my point is, reducing the parking to make it affordable for the builder is not my motivator. Knowing for the fact that the builder can go out and get tax credits, HUD, federal, local, on and on and on, to make this development happen. That's my issue. My other issue, too, is we've voted on one to reduce the parking standards. This seems a little bit more stringent. And I will talk about the livability of Clackamas County. I am very concerned about this. We've already increased 25 units to 60 with the 20% bonus. That has already affected our overall, I believe, our livability. And so that's why I cannot accept this particular proposal. Although, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a motion. We'll vote up or down, and then we'll deal with it later. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith. Because one of our greatest needs is housing supply, I think every tool in our toolbox should be utilized, because once you create more supply of housing, then it helps everyone. It helps to just ease the burden of affordability across the entire spectrum. So whatever we can do as a governing body to do that, I think is really, really important. Also, leaving this leaving this to market forces, we have seen does not create the types of affordable housing that are needed to create more housing supply. The complexity of affordable housing units for developers and accessing low-income tax credits, not only the complexity of getting those, but all of the costs that go into the accounting and the lawyering, the lawyers and all of that to make those work, increase the costs extraordinarily above a typical development. So my view is anything we can do to incentivize it, if this will help create more, this is about public-private partnership in a sense. This is incentivizing private industry to do what we need for the public good. So with that, I will go ahead and make the motion.
Just a minute. We have another commissioner in the queue.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just want to, what you're really speaking to, colleagues, is the economics, and I just want to make you think about something for a minute. We're watching these units where they pencil and are going up in the Portland area.
What, Paul? There's what?
We're watching these type of units go up in the Portland area, for example, okay? Now, Portland area, an acre of land in Portland is worth a heck of a lot more than an acre of land here in Clackamas County. So that's incentive number one to build in Clackamas County. The permit fees are far more expensive in Portland than they are in Clackamas County. Another incentive. And our tax environment in Clackamas County is a heck of a lot less than it is in Multnomah County. So there's three incentives that overwhelm this number of the parking requirement. So for the quality of life and all the factors we discussed here today, and we discussed on October 6th, and we discussed in many forums, I think it's important to realize the impacts to those neighborhoods and the people walking and the safety issues, because when where parking overflows, that is areas where pedestrians can't walk when there's no sidewalks, and we have an area saturated. These corridors are saturated with those environments. So it's not from the safety elements, quality of life. There's enough incentives here to incentivize people to build here, more so than it costs in Portland. So,
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes. Metro recently completed, or they're about to complete, an affordable housing project in Greshamtown Station. And I don't know exactly what the parking per unit is, but I can tell you that as soon as the apartments in that complex began to be inhabited, parking on surrounding streets is no longer available. And so that's an example of an affordable housing project, a recent one, where the effects of that project on surrounding neighborhoods, streets, is very, very observable. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now consider the fourth recommendation to reduce the overall parking for households earning 60 below the area's median income. I will entertain a motion.
I will go ahead and move that we approve the portion of ZDO 277 to reduce the overall amount of parking required for any multifamily development that is affordable to households earning below or at the 60% of the area median's income as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Point of order, did you say 50 or 60?
60.
60, okay, good, thank you. I'll second that.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Fisher and seconded by Commissioner Schrader. Any other further discussion? Mary, please call the poll.
Commissioner Savas,
No.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schull,
No.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
No, motion fails, 3-2. We're going to set this particular area at the end of the meeting. We're going to revisit it at the end of the meeting, and I will have staff bring up a proposal today that we can get to yes on. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to consider the next. Martha, you're up.
Thank you. So the next piece is also an additional reduction on top of that 0.25 reduction for the overall multifamily housing parking ratios. And this is a reduction that relates to a specific location. The proposal would allow for an additional 40% reduction. And again, it results in these numbers in the table here for units that are within a quarter-mile walking distance of a light rail station. There was some discussion at the prior hearing about other possible locations. Some other things that could be considered certainly would be only some light rail stations or other transit, or within proximity of other transit lines like frequent bus, or in only specific geographic locations in the region, like the Clackamas Regional Center. But the proposal that was moved forward from staff and the Planning Commission is just within a quarter-mile walking distance of light rail stations.
Thank you, Martha Fritzie, for that. I don't have as much heartburn over this particular one because it is within very short distance to the light rail station. And frankly, isn't that why people want to live in an apartment building located on a light rail? Because there is light rail there, and they don't necessarily want a car. There are people in this county that don't want to have to drive. They like using mass transit, the light rail and/or the bus. And so I am not so worried about this particular one, although I will be more than happy to listen to the discussion on this. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, as I mentioned on October 6th, when we had this discussion, this is kind of a fascinating one in that we've got the green line that, comes into Clackamas County. We have 2 stations in Clackamas County, I believe, the Fuller Road and the Town Center as the stops. Adequate parking as of, today, in each of those, not a problem there. Quite the opposite problem we have in the 2 stops in Clackamas County on the Orange Line, one of which is in a city, which we're not here talking about today, and most significantly, the one at Park Avenue at the bus stop there. We've had parking deficiencies since the day the light rail station opened. Got pictures of the overflow. People bring their cars, they are overflowing in neighborhoods. We have heard many community meetings, one of which I hosted on this very topic. So we are parking deficient there. Is there an answer for that? No, there's not. So we've got two, we have one with parking deficiencies and one with sufficient parking. So absent some means of addressing that, I have concerns. Unlike the chairs, I actually have more heartburn on this one than I do the previous one we voted on.
How many areas are there in the county this close to a light rail station?
Well, the unincorporated area has 3 light rail stations, the Park Avenue Station along McLaughlin, and then there's 2 on the Green Line, the Fuller Road Station, and then 1 at Clackamas Town Center.
That's what I thought. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I'm wondering, my understanding at the Park Avenue spot, I hear what Commissioner Savas is saying, but I've also heard, and I want to see if I can verify this, that there is an ability to actually expand that parking area. Is that correct? Build up? Do we know?
Yep, just like there is adding more transit and shuttles and all those other things that we have asked for, it has not materialized.
But it could be, but we've asked for it and it hasn't happened. Okay. And that's through TriMet.
Yep,
Correct.
and if that happens, we can always come back and make this change.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Scholl?
I realize that many people would be attracted to a housing situation near a max line that would enable them to eliminate the car. But the problem is that people living in a situation where there's no parking, there's still a need for parking when the grandkids come to visit, or somebody comes to visit, for dinner. You see what I mean? In other words, when we get down too low on this parking, even if the person who's living there doesn't own a car, there's still a need for people to come and park in that development for different reasons. So I have some heartburn with this one.
Okay. Any other comments? Let's now consider the 5th recommendation to reduce the overall parking within a quarter-mile walking distance of light rail. Commissioner Schrader, do you have a motion?
Okay, I move we approve the portion of ZDO 277 to reduce the overall amount of parking required for any multifamily development that is within a quarter-of-a-mile walking distance of a light rail station as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Schrader and seconded by Commissioner Fisher. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, please call the poll.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Schull,
No.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
No,
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 3-2. Martha, what's up next?
I was writing, excuse me. So this is the last component of the parking conversation, and this is something that was not part of the original proposal that you saw at the first hearing, something that came up out of conversations from that hearing. And there was some interest in an option for a developer or an property owner to come in and apply for a reduced parking ratio. And again, this would be on top of the overall parking ratio, the 0.25 reduction that was approved, to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and it would not exceed 20% below that. And to do so, a developer or an applicant would have to have a parking study completed. There would be a list of items that would need to be included in that parking study, including an assessment of demand, looking at other similar projects, and a number of other factors. And then that developer would come in and apply through a land use application process, and it would be assessed and either approved or not approved, associated with any multifamily housing development. There are certainly advantages and disadvantages to adding this type of procedure. It provides more flexibility to some developers, but it provides less certainty. And it would be something that is fairly discretionary. So this option could be in addition to or instead of other options. Since we've already voted on the other options, I guess what we would be considering now is in addition to the other options.
I think this is a very tricky one that it's going to be hard for staff to implement, and I'm going to move to table number 6.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you
agree
very
with you
much.
on that.
Discussion, Commissioner Shaw.
Well, my concern with this one is that if it were to be approved, what would be the requirements that a developer would have to satisfy to get his request approved? So that would require
It would be a mess.
quite a bit of work to come up with some sort of objective a checklist that would lead to an approval of a request for reduction. So I agree, maybe we ought to look at this one at a later date.
Okay, Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, this is where I thought we might end up, actually, and that is that if we had voted no on all of the others, then I would have voted for this one, because this would have been on a case-by-case basis in which those reductions would be evaluated, and also based on a parking study. So I thought that this was really the answer, so to speak, to addressing some of those areas where we have deficiencies, and areas where, we don't, it'll be allowed, so on and so forth. I do have one question, though. Could you just expand on this second bullet here, type 2 land use application? Could you just talk about what that really means?
Yes, of course. So a type 2 land use application is an application that would come in to the planning division. It's an application that is reviewed and assessed by staff or the planning director. It is not a type of application that has to go to a public hearing. The decision, it's notified, neighbors and other agencies are notified, but the decision is made in-house.
Okay, and what type of application would apply where it goes before the Board of Commissioners?
The Board of Commissioners only sees land use applications that relate to changes to our comprehensive plan.
Okay, so under this proposal, would one define that these standards here as clear and objective? Probably not. You said discretionary earlier, right?
Right.
Right. Okay, thank you. Want to make that clarification.
I'm going to make a comment on this. Commissioner Fisher, you're up.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the rationale behind this. Is this something that, given your experience from the staff level, you thought would be helpful? And part of my reasoning and what I'm trying to answer my brain is I know that for a stable business environment, having certainty is really important. And so I'm just interested where this originated and the rationale.
This is something that other jurisdictions do. And I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a certain parking ratio. So there would be a choice for developer, like you can meet our parking ratio, or then you could go through this more timely and costly, certainly, parking study to get something different. And so it's an option on top of the certainty that we have with our regular parking ratios.
And so is it pretty standard across jurisdictions that this is an option to create this flexibility?
I don't know that I'd call it standard. It's certainly done.
Okay.
Can I build on that a little bit? Is there any other option that helps streamline that? Because if it's not clear and objective, it results in delays, and I've heard that loud and clear from folks.
I'd like to comment on this.
Yeah, and so my question is, what can be done, in this case to expedite it and make it easier for folks to apply for this that's more timely?
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a more timely way to do it. I mean, a more clear and objective standard would be to actually just have parking ratios that they have to meet for each of these scenarios. In making it a type 2 land use application, we would allow a developer to apply for it up front before they spend and have the certainty before they spend the time and the money to go through the entire design review But that's about all we could do with this type of analysis and option.
So, well, it's assumed that, I think with this one, they want to have less parking. If they're going to apply, if they're going to go to this trouble of applying, they're going to bring forth evidence that will have a less parking standard, not more parking, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, well then, I'm having some trouble with this because discretionary design review, I think, is fraught with problems just from a human level. And I think we need to codify it as much as possible. I do think it could add time to the process, which means, it could add more costs. But I suppose if the builder is willing to incur those costs to go forward, I don't know, in this particular, I'm having trouble with this. I think we need to kick this back and allow some more time and massage on this. So there is a motion on the floor to table this, and it has been seconded. And so now I will call for the vote on that.
Commissioner Schull,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Due to the conundrum, no.
Commissioner Fisher,
No.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes to table this. Let's revisit this, get together with staff, and, because if we were to pass this today, to me, it's illogical to pass a discretionary allowance when we've already passed two of the ZDOs that allow for parking reduction. So to me, having that both is illogical, and maybe this particular one came from the commissioners when you were talking to us earlier about this, but let's.
Chair, just point of order, what was the vote on that?
3-2.
3-2, it passed.
To table, okay.
To table.
Yeah, just wanna
Passed to
make-
table. I mean, it's not dead,
Right. yeah,
but we're just not going to consider that today because I think we need some guidelines on the process on that.
I just didn't catch the count, thank you.
Yes, okay. 3. Okay. 3-2, okay. Next up. Nate, we have some split votes on this. I am willing to offer up in one vote as what the script indicates. And each commissioner can vote the package up or down. However, if there are some commissioners that want to vote on these separately, what do you recommend?
My recommendation would be to follow the script, take a vote on the motion, because how the motion is structured is, it is an umbrella authorization to move forward with the entire ZDO 277 package, consistent with the votes that have been taken. And so
Can
that
you
would-
say that louder? I'm
Sure.
sorry, I didn't hear.
So the way that the motion is structured in your script is an umbrella motion, if you will, to approve the entire ZDO 277 package, but as modified by your prior votes.
Okay.
And so that would include everything with the omission of the affordable housing parking reduction, and, of course, the case-by-case basis related to the parking that was just
Okay, so the
tabled.
case-by-case basis, and the one that failed regarding the 60%, which also failed, are we going to revisit those?
Well, a thumbs-up vote, if you receive 3 votes to move forward with ZDO 277, what we would do is we would bring back the ordinance for approval at a final business meeting, and then we could revisit those parking discussions at a later date. And we could theoretically include those in a separate ordinance in the future.
Okay, so let me get this straight. And I have staff shaking their head no back there. Jennifer Hughes, please come forward, introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Hughes, I'm the planning director. We would not really anticipate bringing this back unless you specifically ask us to. I mean, this is phase 1, we've given you all these strategies, it's clear that 1 does not have support, that would be 2B. You've tabled 2D, which really, we were presenting at this time under the assumption that some of the other parking reductions might fail, and you might want this instead, and I'm not hearing that's the case. So I think staff's prepared to move to phase 2, and if the board wants to have more of a parking discussion, maybe after this percolates for a while, we can certainly always come back. But we would consider this kind of suspended at this point after you take your vote today on what appears to have support.
That's fine if the board, if there's consensus to bring this back after the first of the year, after we're able to come to some more solutions on it. Also, there's also another strategy that Clackamas County has not considered, and that is what to do about some bad actors in their parking. And Clackamas County has not ever implemented, for instance, any permitting or shuttles or tickets or this or this or this, because I don't believe we've ever really had the need before. I don't believe it's an issue. What I have huge concern of, and I have repeatedly said, is overflow parking from these units that goes into people's neighborhoods where there are single-family residents, and they park in front of the homes, thereby taking away the parking that is assumed when the person buys the house. I have such angst over that, I can't even begin to tell you. So somehow, that needs to be addressed as we move forward with this continued parking discussion next year. So I'm going to instruct staff today to start working up a plan and start thinking about what we could do on that. I'm in no hurry, but it needs to be addressed. I don't think we're going to have a rash of builders coming in and putting up these units like tomorrow. I mean, maybe we would, but I doubt seriously. We have time to mitigate the effects of that type of situation. We also have time, commissioners, if you have a plan that you think we can work on parking to make it better, we can go back to do that. But I am going to entertain the final motion for passage today. Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, just a couple comments. I mean, I'm concerned that the one recommendation that we did not adopt would help our developers. It would incentivize housing that is affordable. We have so few tools in our toolbox as a governing body, and I'm just really concerned about the message that sends from this board about what our priorities are. I totally understand that we have to balance all of this with quality of life, and I also understand that we may need, as we become more populated, look at parking processes into the future, but I am very concerned about the message that this is sending. So I would strongly recommend that we do bring this back, because if there was a developer that wanted to develop housing that was affordable at 30 or 60%, it's like, thank you so much. We so need that housing. And if they had a plan and it made sense and there wasn't going to be adverse effects of parking, I would really like to think that this board would prioritize that and go with the item that was tabled today. So I would strongly encourage us bringing this back, and to really hear, we should hear from, maybe we need to hear directly from developers to say, yeah, you know, I won't do it at this because it just doesn't pencil, but if I was able to build more units, this could work for me. We have got to somehow incentivize private investment in affordable housing, because we don't have the public dollars to do it. The Metro Housing Bond was great. That incentivized a number of units, but it doesn't nearly come to solve the need of needing a whole spectrum of housing. And that is a quality of life issue beyond for our children, grandchildren, and into the future in Clackamas County.
I would submit this package that we're passing today, increasing density from 25 units to 60 units with a 20% bonus, is huge for Clackamas County. We have incentivized our builders. They will be able to go forward. I think what we've done so far is a good piece of work that any commissioner can hold up and say, hey, we've done this. The Metro Bond can kick in with some builders who want to use it. They can go start building right now with what these densities are applied to. We are not holding back on anything. I think we can go ahead and vote this up and down, and if there is a consensus to move forward with additional parking discussions, we can do that. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, so Chair Smith, your earlier comments about the overflow and the parking and the impacts, I appreciate that. I completely concur and agree. And Commissioner Fisher, all the points you made, I completely agree and concur. I actually think that there is, it's hard to unwind the change we're about to make, right? So it seems really logical that as we build into this, there's a way, I think there's a way to get there, you know, if we just think about this a minute. I'm going to digress a moment and say that at our October 6th meeting, I was really hoping that maybe what we'd have before us today would be something along the lines of parking management, permitting, and some of the things I think you alluded to, Chair. And it's not. It's not. But can we get there? I think we can. But I think the sweet spot is that we can build on is actually approving all the density changes we talked about and only the 20% parking reduction that goes to review. That gets to everything, and then we can build on piecing this together as time goes on. That's a sweet spot. That's what I would support today. But what's embedded, what we're voting on today, I can't support because of the parking, you know, the parking things that we talked about, those elements. But the sweet spot gets back to both Chair Smith's concerns and Commissioner Fisher's concerns and all the concerns we all expressed. That's a sweet spot. So if there was a
Please state
motion.
your sweet
Just a
spot.
minute, please don't interrupt.
Sorry.
Commissioner Savas has the
If
floor.
there, again, I'll just repeat, the motion that I'm suggesting, or package I'm suggesting, would be to approve all of the density increases proposed today, and only the parking, the latter parking thing that we just tabled as the only parking change we make. And that it gives the incentive and a path, and then we can build upon things when there's a parking management plan put in place or some kind of controls in that are probably, yeah, on and off development site, on or off, not necessarily part of a developer's responsibility, but a mixture of that, whatever it may be. But we're not there. We don't have that today. So
So Commissioner Savas, are you saying you will change all your no votes to a yes vote if we add the discretionary piece in here?
if I would, what I'm saying is that, to clarify, so, and these aren't numbered. I wish they were numbered.
Oh,
But
I went through and I numbered mine, so, okay, to help you,
sure.
on number 3, you voted no on number 3 about the multifamily development of .2 spaces per unit. It was a reduction of .25. You voted no on that. Number 4, you voted no on the affordable housing at 60% of the median. I voted no on that, well, and so did Commissioner Scholl. There were 3 no votes on that. And then on the quarter mile within a light rail station, there was 1 no vote on that. Is that right, Mary? That was number 5.
5, that was 3-2.
Number 5 was 3-2, okay. I wrote 3-1, excuse me. That was a 3-2. So if any commissioner wants to change their no vote to a positive vote, and we add in a case-by-case basis on motion number 6, I will entertain a motion to pass everything presented today. Otherwise, we'll just vote at piece by, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so I think that's not what I was suggesting. What I was suggesting, I'll just use numbers. What I'm suggesting is if motion number 1 and 2 and 6 is what I would vote for.
Okay, well, I don't think we're there today on that with the majority of the votes as I'm reading it.
And there's a total of 6 today, right? Minus the final vote.
That, which is 7.
Right, which is, yeah.
Well, I don't think we're there on that. We could revisit it later. I would be willing to change my vote, any of my no votes, to a yes vote, to get the rest of the board concurrence on all 6 of these. No, Mark, you say no?
No.
Okay, well, then I'm going to entertain a motion. We have the votes on, to take a final vote on the entire ZDO-277. May I have a motion?
Okay. I move
Martha,
we-
go ahead and read it.
I move we approve ZDO 277 in a manner that implements board direction based on prior approved motions related to the individual issues considered today and at our October 6th hearing on this matter.
Seconded.
Commissioner Schrader has made a motion, Commissioner Stoll has seconded. Commissioner Fisher, discussion.
I believe we will be coming back in January with what was tabled. Is that my understanding?
Not in January. Staff will probably not be prepared to do that. It's a pretty big lift with what we were talking about up here. I've talked to staff about that before, and it is a huge work project. And it's going to be months and months before that comes back.
Well, I'm just talking about creating some flexibility.
I think that's also going to be to make my satisfaction on that. I just don't see it soon. I mean, I can't make a promise that it'll be here in January.
Well, I'm just concerned, I really believe that if the board had some additional information on what would incentivize developers for affordable housing, that they may want to create that flexibility for the one item that was not agreed to today.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, again, maybe if there is an opportunity to rethink this or defer this to another couple of weeks to get this ironed out. I think what Commissioner Fisher's driving at and what I'm trying to driving at, I think, is this, again, the sweet spot. But if we go forward with the motion, I would certainly like to have clarification as to, by number, what it is we're voting on. Are we voting on 1, 2, 3, and 5, and 5?
Nate, what are we voting on?
So the motion is to approve the package except as modified by the individual votes. So it would be the entire ZDO 277 package minus again, the affordable housing, parking, density,
Well,
parking
there were two
reduction,
there was one that was tabled and one that was voted against.
and in the case-by-case basis, parking amendment that was tabled.
So
Correct.
everything passes but two.
Correct.
And the numbers of those are
Number 6?
4 and 6.
4 and 6. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments before we take the poll? There's a motion on the table. So everything passes except for number 4 and number 6.
And if the vote fails, then it really forces us to bring this back in a more, perhaps for opportunity for a more
I'm going to
cohesive.
say this, Commissioners. You all had an opportunity since our last hearing to make modifications in individual meetings with staff. This information has been before you for 3 weeks. Frankly, I can't see a lot of changes unless somebody's going to really sit down and roll up their sleeves and say, oh, I want this, and I want this, and frankly, I don't even know if it's possible. So what I'm going to recommend is that we take a vote. Commissioner Scholl?
Yeah, the items that we have passed today, I believe, will be seen by the construction industry as a very positive step forward in moving to a place where we can start to achieve those housing units we need. The two that didn't pass, we have time in the future to look at those again. Those they haven't failed forever. They could come back and we can see
Are you up again?
something good on that. So I think we've done a good thing today.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just to clarify, Chair, is that everything I raised here today, I raised with staff, well, I won't say everything. The issues about a parking management plan and parking options around the areas is things I did raise with staff, so I didn't have an option. If you want to, I don't think any of us had an option to make sure it was included in the packet because I asked for that. It wasn't included. I wasn't expecting it would necessarily be included. So I just want to clarify, I spent the time.
I did too.
I rolled up my sleeves. Got my sleeves rolled up currently right now, trying to find that happy spot, that happy medium to get us there. And I just want to be very thoughtful about this.
Well, and I appreciate that. The management plan, however, falls outside of our ZDOs, isn't that correct? Our management plan is not a land use decision, so that was not possible here today. That's why I want staff to bring it back on a separate consideration in a policy session, which I believe is not a land use hearing. Is that correct?
Well,
Just a moment, I asked the question.
wasn't sure who you were asking the question to.
Yes.
I'm asking the question.
Yes, that's
The
correct.
parking plan is outside of the ZDOs.
Yes.
It would not necessarily be a land use hearing, it would be a policy decision.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Am I hearing that
It's not a
right?
land use issue.
What?
It is not a land use hearing. It's not in the
Okay, so I'm
ZDO.
thinking it will be a policy decision that we could work on later. Okay, that's a point of clarification, I want to make sure. Paul, you have us more?
Yeah, and that is, I would argue then, and I'm not disagreeing with staff at all. Staff's done a great job. By the way, you're all doing a great job. Sorry to put you all through this, so just want to just put kudos to our staff for all the hard work, all of you. I would argue that any of these parking changes are really a separate item from the density discussion. Though, because everything's interrelated. So, and I understand the relationship. I just think that there's an opportunity to build on this piece by piece in the future, and the way to start that without having to reverse anything and go into error is to step into this, and I think that item 1, 2, and 6 broach that and get us there.
Okay, one more comment, then I'm going to call for the vote, and we'll see what happens. Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure, Paul, that's what you're suggesting, and I want to understand when you said 1, 2, 6. I'm just not sure, but I would say I can get to a yes today with some assurance that we can discuss the two options of the affordable housing and some parking flexibility for those units sooner. Just the concept, because I got a text from a developer or a realtor here says, I don't think your colleagues understand how expensive it is to build parking. We need more housing. Just the overall performa of what it takes, and I really don't want government to be the be-all and end-all of affordable housing. I really want to incentivize our private partners to help in this journey, and I just think our board could use just more information about that
Okay, we're going to take a
piece.
vote on this. I think
Well,
we've beat
sure.
this to death.
Can
I'm going to call for the vote. Thank you, and
Chair
guess
Smith,
what?
I would like to vote yes, but it's really
Uh-huh.
for you and
listen,
Vice Chair to set the
We
agenda,
had-
and I would
uh-huh,
like
I
some
know that. We're
assurances.
going to call for the vote. If it fails, it fails. Either way, if it passes, we're still going to come back and address your issues.
Well, I would
Commissioner
like to
Fisher.
know what, not months and months and months or a year, I would like just some time frame, and maybe a suggestion. from
Jennifer,
staff.
please come forward.
So the Housing Strategies project has 2 more phases. If you want to have a discussion about the issues that are tabled, for lack of a better word today, we can certainly do that as part of a future discussion about Phase 2. It doesn't really go with Phase 2, but if you wanted it to, it could, or Phase 3, which at this point is sort of a catch-all for a number of different things. That's on the work program now. The other thing, of course, is that you approve the long-range planning work program every 2 years. We've also committed to coming back with a mid-cycle check-in that would be coming up. So this whole concept of a parking management plan and how that fits in your priorities and who would do that could also, that discussion could be had at that point. So
And
I
when
think
is Phase 2?
we'll be back.
The
Phase
question-
2 started now. In fact, Dan will be talking to you about it at Issues, we hope, next week. He's very excited.
Or the week after? I mean, I just want to make sure that
Yes.
the information that's presented is accurate and something we can work with.
Phase 2 has a
Well,
hard
that's
deadline.
good to know. Okay,
So-
there you go, Commissioner Fisher.
That sounds good. When is the hard deadline?
Phase 2's deadline, we have to be done by June 30th, or with the whole thing, or the model code takes effect, because this is the middle housing
And
bill.
when is Phase 3?
After that,
Okay,
so summer.
so on Phase 2, the middle housing, that's a piece of legislation that we need to consider
Correct.
in that, and that's a whole different ballywick than what this is.
It is, but if you wanted to talk parking again, we could do it at that time, or we could at least have the conversation and then maybe
I
move the
think the
substance
parking
off.
management piece needs to be separate, but it's
Yes.
all encompassing over
I would agree.
everything. That's what I think. Okay, I'm going to call for the vote.
Chair, if I may, just one.
Commissioner Savas, please be brief.
2 things I think we need to be very thoughtful of, and number 1 is that on this 20% reduction, all those tables you saw earlier, whether you voted for or against, would be reduced by 20%.
I know that.
Okay? So you're talking a further reduction. And secondly, and why I think the parking should be done separately is, Phase 2 includes those adjustments for HB 2001 and 3 and all of that. Therefore, the ADUs and the imposition of all that in the suburban areas, in the single-family housing, you are reducing the parking requirements around those areas, essentially. I know that this is multifamily, a lot of this, but this parking issue is affecting the entire area, and there's areas where these areas are adjacent. Multifamily is adjacent to suburban family housing areas.
Thank you
So
for
this is a
pointing that
bigger-
out.
bigger
Thank you,
discussion.
Commissioner Savas. Mary, call the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
No.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Shull,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Now, does staff have adequate direction on what you need to do next?
We do, and I think in your script, you need to tell us what we need to do next.
Okay, staff is going to come back with a parking management plan that will be all encompassing for what we passed today, what we pass for in the future. Clackamas County has never done that because we've really not had a need, I don't believe, until now. Maybe there's some pocket areas here and there, and I think you need to address the livability issues, the clogging of residential neighborhoods, the things that I mentioned, the things that Commissioner Savas has mentioned. Additionally, on the motion that failed on number 6, motion number 6, if we can get to a plan, and Commissioners, I want you to go back and read the email that came in yesterday from Roseanne Johnson, Home Builders Association and Portland Metropolitan Realtors. She brings up some very intelligent points on how discretionary planning can really backfire. I can see, and now, not the current people in the county, but I can see some builder coming in and say, oh, you guy behind the counter, I want this and this and this, and I can see an argument happening. If it's your discretion, that is not a good thing necessarily. I can see a whole lot of things going sideways on that, and it has happened before in local jurisdictions. So discretionary is going to be, it's really going to have to nail that down. So I would suggest you go back and you read that letter and you reach out to PMAR, home builders, anybody you can think of to help us get to that, because I'm not so sure that that's going to be the winner that you're thinking that it is going to be. Anything else, commissioners, that you want staff to do? Thank you very much for all your participation, commissioners. I think we did some very good work today. We have raised some very good points. I appreciate you all, and this meeting is adjourned.